Hello, everybody. Today we are speaking with Craig Carlisle, the Director of Missions at Etowah Baptist Association in Alabama. Hello, Craig. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Mike. It's good to be with you.
I am really excited to hear what you've got to say and learn about the work that you guys are doing in your community to advance the gospel and make disciples. Why don't we start with, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry?
Okay. Well, I am currently serving as the Director of Missions at Etowah Baptist Association. I transitioned to this ministry almost 4 years ago after 30 years of being a local church pastor. This was not a position that I ever thought I would be in. Amongst Baptist circles, sometimes guys who transition to this position as Director of Missions are labeled as guys who were unsuccessful in ministry and struggling and just trying to make it to retirement. And that was not my story. The Lord saved my last church to be my best church. I was very happy there, thought I was going to be there 20 years and retire. And the Lord said, no, not yet, Craig. And so he called me to this role. Baptist churches are divided up into basically counties and association of churches. And we are the smallest geographic county in the state of Alabama, but we are the fourth largest Baptist association with 82 churches crammed into our very tight geographic space. So my role is to be a pastor to pastors, an encourager, counselor, help them with strategies for ministry. I also do placement ministry where I share resumes. I help churches find pastors and pastors find churches. But my favorite part of the role is being a pastor to pastors, just being an encouragement and staying in touch with my 82 pastors. And I will say with that, a lot of people equate a director of missions with a bishop. And I want to be clear, I am not a bishop. I have no authority. I serve at the request of the churches and the pleasure of the churches. I can't go in and tell them what to do or how to do it. I can't advise them, but I have no authority over them. And so I'm basically just come alongside, coordinate, try to bring everybody together and just get to be a pastor to all my guys.
Oh, that's wonderful. You know, I was reading a Barna study not too long ago that said that in the last year and a half, about a third of all pastors began planning an exit strategy out of ministry. And probably was brewing before COVID hit, but I would imagine that might make your position even more significant today.
It has, Mike. I've spent the last 18 months primarily encouraging and building up. Guys have been frustrated. They've been disappointed. They've been discouraged. I have not had any of our pastors walk away yet. And I say yet because we're still in the midst of all this. I've had some that have transitioned to other churches, but they did not leave the ministry. I do have friends who have taken an early exit or maybe set up in retirement. They were going to work longer, but this pandemic and all this gone with it has, made them expedite their exit strategy. So Barna is right, and I've read the articles too from Barna and others that there does seem to be a major exodus that is either underway or is escalating to see pastors leave. And I'm at the end of the baby boomer generation. I'm 60. And one of my concerns is that there's going to be a lot of pastors my age that are going to be retiring in the next 5 to 7 years. And we don't have the young pastors to come behind them to fill those pulpits. And I'm really concerned with the early retirements coming, it's just speeding up that process. And it's very concerning for the future of the church. Wow. And leadership.
Yeah. It's well, then I guess the goal of today's podcast would be to be of encouragement to those men. My last church was a church of under 100, and the pastor had been there. I think he's going closer to 30 years now. And I have watched that man literally go through battles that most people could not do. If the Lord was not with him, he would have just succumbed years ago.
Sure.
We ourselves planted a house church last January, and COVID literally opened the door. We opened the doors the first weekend in February, and then we had 25 people, and they stayed with us all year long. Praise the Lord.
Yes.
But when we moved, so the Lord moved us, and this year we moved to a new community in Illinois still. And I've run into a lot of pastors here with congregations literally under 15 people. And the discouragement when you meet these men, it's something that they wear on their face. It's, as if they're responsible for people not having a hunger for the word. I would love to see a way to encourage these men not to give up, because as you said, this is not the time, right?
No.
The world needs shepherds now,
Right.
like never before in my life.
Absolutely. And their congregations need them as well. As I said, I have 82 churches in my association. 54 of them are bivocational or part-time.
Yeah.
I have 28 full-time. And some of those full-time are what we call questionable full-time, as far as what they're able to pay and for the pastor to be able to make a decent living. They are full-time, but some of them are stronger, larger, that sort of thing. Even some of my full-time churches are on the smaller side, but they're able to do more. Right. And it is a real challenge, especially with the full-time guys. I can call up and get a cup of coffee, lunch, meeting. I have no problem. But my bivocational and part-time guys that are actually working other jobs and trying to balance being a pastor and a husband and a father, and it's a greater challenge. So I'm not able to go get coffee and lunch with them like I'm the full-time pastor. So it takes a greater effort, and I do a lot of texting, a lot of phone calling, and to make sure that they know that I care. But those are the guys that that are really struggling right now to get people back. The smaller congregations, the social distancing, all that becomes a great challenge for them because they don't have large buildings. So they have really faced a great amount of challenge getting their sermons online. One thing that we saw in our association was some of our larger churches helped our smaller church pastors by recording their sermons and helping them get it up online. I saw a great partnership in that, which was a beautiful thing in the throes when all of this started. But I've been very pleased with our pastors. I'm not saying they haven't been discouraged and disheartened at times, but one of the things I've noticed in my guys is their resilience, and that I've not had a church that has turned on their pastor. That's not to say that there hasn't been conflict over masking, not masking, opening or closing, all of those things that have gone with this, but they're still there and they're still going. And hopefully soon they're going to be able to get beyond this. But it has been a wonderful thing and an encouraging thing to me as a director of missions to watch my guys do what they had to do, regardless. It wasn't comfortable, wasn't easy, but they have done it, and God's honored that. And so, we haven't had any church splits, we haven't had any church closures. Everybody seems to have borne the brunt of this, and I'm very proud of our local pastors.
Well, thank you for all your hard work. I know that. I'm excited because it sounds like the churches that you work with are the exact type of churches that the Lord has called me to come alongside. So I have a great deal to learn from what you're doing down there. But we met on Facebook, because that's how I meet pastors primarily. Is
Right.
I go out and I look for people on Facebook who are like-minded believers. And the reason I reached out to you was on August 19th on Facebook, you posted a post that just grabbed my attention. You wrote, I've noticed several people that seem to be shouting at people through their posts that people need to get back in church. Maybe it's time to get out, knock on the door, and invite people to church. This is my neighborhood. What made you write that post?
I've become very frustrated with, and I'm on social media and I post quite frequently, but I've tried not to use that as my pulpit. I try to use it for ways of encouragement. And I see guys do posts and they'll say, you ought to get back in church. You need to get back in church. If you haven't been back to church in this time, it's time for you to come back and all this. It's almost like a scolding, and it gives the appearance of shouting. I mean, get yourself back in church. And, in this day and time, people are going through transitions and we're still learning from all of this. But it just broke my heart. One particular post that I read, I thought, this is not the way to do it. This is not how you're going to get people back in church. Probably the people who read the post that were followers of the person that I saw post, already Christians. They're probably already back in church. He's not reaching a community, the community that he needs to be reaching. And so in the midst of all this over the last year, Mike, the Lord's just burdened my heart. Being a pastor, I grew up, even growing up as a Christian in a local church, I grew up with, going on visitation on Tuesday nights, gathering, getting as many people there, dividing up the prospects, and going on cold call visitation, knocking on the door, hoping somebody would answer it. And I grew up on that. I practiced it in my ministry and my churches that I served. But as time went by, we started hearing, that's not the way to do it anymore. People want you to respect their privacy. They're too busy. They don't want some stranger or some uninvited guest coming into their home. And I tried making appointments, and that was had some degree of success, but it was still very difficult. And we heard the conversation change to rather than going to the home, just having gospel conversations wherever you are, the ball field, the dance recital, wherever you are, take advantage of the opportunity. And granted, we should do that. We should have been doing that all along. Mm-hmm. But over the last several months, the Lord just laid on my heart, in this day and time, people are hurting. They're dejected. They are struggling. They're trying to figure things out. And I believe that people are genuinely searching for the truth. They're looking for something that they can count on, mm-hmm. that they can depend on, something that's authentic and real and genuine. And so I began the process through our statement, "This is my neighborhood," mm-hmm. to challenge our churches to do an emphasis where we get out and knock on doors. And so we're in the midst of challenging our churches to knock on 25,000 doors in our community. Wow. Now, you did the math. If all 82 churches, and I'm not naive enough to think they're all going to do it, but if they did, that's 300 doors a church. Mm-hmm. 304.8 to be honest, to be exact, church houses per church. And so our association printed up door hangers. We made spaces for them to put their church information on. And we are in the midst of challenging our churches to get out and just go to their community. First of all, to let them know that they're open. Mm-hmm. We are here. We love you. And we're here to serve you. Mm-hmm. Tell them about Jesus if they give them the opportunity. Present the gospel. At bare minimum, invite them to church. Mm-hmm. Try to get them in the doors of the church and communicate to your community that you are there for them. You are open, regardless of what part of town you're in, regardless of if you're in the suburbs or in the urban area, whatever, we're here for you. And I've been very pleased so far with the response. We've got a rally scheduled for Sunday night. where we're going to come and be challenged and have a time of worship. And our goal is to do it during the month of September, to knock on the 25,000 doors.
Wow.
And guys have gotten behind it. And I was concerned. I thought, well, that's not, I was going to hear that's not the way we do it, but my concern is we're not doing anything, Mike. We're not doing anything. And if you can get out and just let your neighbors know you're there, you love them, you care about them, I think it'll go a long way. I've already had one guy, he came and got 500 door hangers from me, one of my pastors. He's already been out and passed out 100 of them. Had 3 gospel conversations and invited others to come to church. That's before we've ever even started. So I'm excited about the momentum that this is getting, and I'm very hopeful that we're going to see some differences made in some of our communities by our churches that have been kind of dormant for a while.
Good. Well, we'll be praying for you in that work, because I hope you'll follow up with me and let me know how successful it was.
Absolutely.
When you bring that up, one of the things that really occurs to me, and you're going to have to help me be clear in this. The Great Commission was to go and make disciples, and implied in that is sharing the gospel, right? So the whole focus should be that, you have been all over the world. I've traveled to Africa. The reality is, as you said earlier before we got on the recording, it started in Jerusalem, right? You don't have to travel the world to share the gospel. The mission field right now is could be your own house, could be your neighbor, could be your workplace, right? This is the mission. America has become the mission field.
Absolutely.
I remember speaking to a missionary from Malawi years ago who said he'd been in the field for like 30 years. And he said, Mike, every time I come back to America, I recognize it less and less. And I realize the need for the gospel there. And that's kind of heartbreaking when you think about all the pastors, the lay leaders, the elders, the deacons, the Christians who have spent their lives serving the Lord, and only to find that we're bankrupt, spiritually bankrupt at this point. So that's really what we're going to talk about today, is making disciples and how that can be an impact in the community. And I'll share a little about Hope Builders as we go through this process. Okay. But the first question that I want to ask you is what is a disciple, and what does disciple making look like to you?
And let me preface my answer to that. Being a Southern Baptist all my life, I grew up under the church growth movement, where most things were about numbers. It's about how many you have in Sunday school, how many you have in worship. And I grew up under that, and my ministry began in that vein. We gave awards to the church that had the most in Sunday school, that had the most baptisms, that had the most numerical increase. It was all about the numbers. And it's just been recently, I would say within the last 20 years, when I did my doctoral work at Southern Seminary in Louisville, it was still under the church growth mindset. My degree was in evangelism and church growth. Well, since that time, the conversation has changed to church health. You don't hear near as much about the numbers as you do about the health of the church. And with that has come what I would consider the disciple-making movement, at least among Baptists. There's more emphasis on intentional disciple-making in our denomination than there has been in my memory. Because I don't remember it being a part of my upbringing. I don't remember being intentionally discipled. Okay. Now, I went through doctrine classes and learned after I was a believer, I went through doctrine classes and got settled on the Baptist faith and message and all of those things, which is a form of discipleship. But really being invested in and poured into to show how to live the Christian life and what is expected of a follower of Christ. I never had that. And so that's what I believe, a disciple is. A disciple is someone who understands what it means to be a follower of Christ, according to the Bible. Mm-hmm. Not Americanized, not Africanized, but what does the Bible teach us about being a follower of Jesus Christ? And so out of that has come this great emphasis where we have slowed down the growth. Okay. You're not seeing churches, have crusades anymore. You're not hearing about that. You are seeing a much more intentional effort to bring people in, but in the process of bringing them in, teaching them on the front end about what it means to be a church member. What are your expectations for your church? And I'm sure you have those for your house church. There's expectations that you're teaching those who are coming. We've raised the bar of what it means to be a member of a Baptist church. It's not just shaking the hand of the pastor and filling out a card. It's now we're taking you through an intentional process to help you be the best church member you can be, but then following it up with intentional investment on what it means to be a faithful, fruitful follower of Jesus Christ. Tom Rayner, who was my lead professor on my doctoral work, said from the very beginning, he said, the evangelism process does not stop until that person becomes a fruit-bearing disciple. And that is where I think, at least in my area of service, that's where we missed the boat. We got them saved, we baptized them, then we left them alone. And consequently, I think what we're seeing now as the church regathers is we're seeing the lack of discipleship. We're seeing people that we thought were bought in, sold out. They're not returning. They're disappointing us. It's hurting us. And what that means is our mission field is increasing, because not only do we have to go get them never saved, we've got to go get those who we thought maybe were saved and that maybe didn't make a genuine commitment. And then we've got to try to bring them back in. And now we've got a disciple later in life for many of them. Absolutely. And so, but a disciple is a person who bears fruit as a follower of Jesus Christ. It means that they understand, how important it is to know the Word of God, how important it is to serve in the local church and serve in your community, how important it is to share the gospel with others, and how important it is to replicate other people into follow it as being a faithful follower of Jesus Christ. And like I said, we as Baptists are paying the price for our lack of discipleship. We've awakened in that area, but man, we've got so much catching up to do, and it's happening. Churches have slowed down. Like I said, it used to be about how many you could get in the door, and now it's about how many you can get in the door and keep. How are we going to keep them in the fold of our fellowship? That is through the process of being an intentional disciple maker. And it's taken us a while because we're by nature impatient. We want to see it now. We've operated on, somebody that comes into the church, we get them baptized, we assume that they're automatically going to become a mature follower like me. They're going to read their Bible. They're going to be in Sunday school. They're going to be faithful in giving. They're going to be faithful in attendance. They're going to get involved in a ministry. And that doesn't happen. And then we look around and all of a sudden they're gone. Where did they go? So that's what, where we are now. And I'm thrilled with the efforts that I see amongst our churches, the number of churches, not all of them, but the number of churches that are pausing, so to speak, and saying, what, we're going to invest in you because we want you to bear fruit for the kingdom. And I'm glad to see it. It's been a long time coming, at least in my area.
That is so encouraging to hear. And I've kind of adopted the philosophy. It's not how big, but how deep.
Absolutely.
Really, I would much rather have one committed, zealous Christian that I'm working with than a building full of people that just aren't interested in growing.
Absolutely.
And I think when we were in Zambia in 2019, one of the things that came up, one of the pastors who joined us said he realized at some point, spiritually speaking, the church was full of infants and there were no adults left. And because of that, these immature Christians were making decisions that really should have been made by the mature believer.
Absolutely.
And we hadn't done a really good job of Ephesians 4 equipping the saints for their good works of ministry. And I thought that was a very telling reveal.
And I think that is very true. That's true for the American church as well, Mike. We have not developed them from infancy. We've never gotten them off milk to meat.
Yeah.
As Paul encourages us to do. And Peter encourages us to do. We have never, we skipped that process. We were glad they were on the milk, but we never helped them to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I think a lot of times when we see church conflict, many times it's because spiritual infants are making major decisions that they're not equipped and ready to make it because they're not a mature believer.
Yeah. And
so you have the squabbles over petty things, and churches divide and split. And I have said from day one, talking about on the association side of it, that we would be stronger in our county with fewer churches.
Yeah.
I mean, 82 is too many. And especially when we have clusters of churches, that's what I call them, where they're sitting basically on top of each other, next door to each other almost, and yet none of them are making an impact on their community.
Yeah.
If some of those churches would consolidate, which is a dirty word, but if they would come together and become one congregation under the banner of Christ and for their community, we would see a greater impact than three struggling churches that are basically doing nothing. And so, I agree with you that the depth of the church is much more important than the size of the church. And I think that's why you're seeing kind of a decline of mega churches. Mega churches that are searching for pastors, they are having struggles with finding somebody that wants to be their pastor or is led to be their pastor, because they don't want that. They want the smaller mindset. It's why you're seeing the church planting movement or the house church movement, is because that you have more spiritual depth and quality than you do in a larger congregation. And it's and it goes against the grain and against the nature of most pastors. And again, it's what we grew up on. It was about size. We want to be the largest church, and like I said, and I went through a phase in my second church where I was in the competitive mode. I thought, if my buddy down the street is doing more than we are, we got to step it up and do better. Yeah. And, I learned very quickly. God corrected me quickly and convicted me, Craig, that's not the way we do ministry, and so, I think we have a great opportunity, Mike, to make the church stronger. I think Ed Stetzer and perhaps others have said, that we're going through somewhat of a purging right now in the body of Christ, and we are finding out who's there for the long haul and who's not. And in their opinion, the church is growing stronger, not weaker, because we're growing in depth and health. The dead wood is kind of falling away.
Yeah.
And the church is actually becoming stronger. Now that means we got to turn back around, and doesn't mean we forget those, but in reality, we're actually getting stronger and better and potentially more impactful than we were before, with all the heaviness that we have.
If Stetzer used the word purging, I usually think of pruning. I think that's how I've always, even when I was a part of a church split once, and it was one of the hardest things in my early life as a Christian to go through that. Right. But the pastor at that point explained to me it was pruning. And and I believe that's where we're at today. There's no reason for me to give up hope. It's actually, I feel like there's greater urgency to do the work that we're doing, because there's a purge or a pruning going on and taking place.
My last church that I served before I left, we were working through our membership, and we reported every year something like 1,700 members. Well, we didn't average 1,700 in attendance, and I took our church membership roll and went through it, and just with some grace, anybody that had attended within the last month, I counted them as a faithful attender. And when I got through, Mike, I had 475 people that I knew, if everybody was there, young children, youth, adult, senior adult. That's how many I could count on. And I was about to lead our church, and I like the word pruning. I was about to lead our church to do a pruning of our membership because a lot of the people that we were carrying had not been there in years. With some of them, we didn't even know where they were. I would imagine if we sent out a letter asking them, we would have had a lot of return mail. You know, I mean,
Right.
so you know, I think that there is a movement now of honest reporting. Church numbers were embellished, especially in the day of numerical growth, and now we're seeing churches narrow the scope to where they're actually reporting the faithful. And I think that's what we have to do. And I think the discipleship process helps us to do that. They're the ones that we can count on. They're the ones that we're going to send out. They're the ones that are the body of Christ for us now. The church that I'm a member of now runs about 200, and they do honest reporting. They report their membership is, I would have to look at it, but it's about 250. They run about 200, but that's an honest report. It's not, we've got 800 members and we're running 200. This is who we are. And that was one thing the Lord convicted me. I thought, there's a lot of churches that are lying, Mike. They're lying because of pride.
Yeah.
And we've got to come to grips with reality and who we are. And who we are is we have been weak. We're trying to become stronger. And the way we're becoming stronger is making sure that our members know what it means to be a member of our church and discipling them to become fruit bearers in their walk.
That's awesome. And thinking about these 82 churches that you're going to send out, hopefully they're going to knock on all these 25,000 doors. And I think about the great opportunity that lies before your county. I've been a part of like the Louis Palau evangelism sessions here in Illinois and Chicago. And I remember all the planning that we went through to prepare for this great harvest. And the idea was that we were going to invite these people to a concert. They were going to hear the gospel. Many were going to seek a local church, and then they were going to get plugged into that church. The reality was, at least our church, we didn't get a single person that had responded in our community. But that said, what I learned from that is 90% of the planning on that was to reach the people, and very little of the effort that we saw. There was communication. I don't want to say that they didn't plan for it, but there was very little on the, okay, now they're there. What do you do with them? So,
right.
For us, our ministry has been doing a 1-on-3 model forever, right? We base it on Jesus working with Peter, James, and John. And
right.
Even during COVID, what we're finding is in Zambia, for instance, I just talked to the guys 2 days ago, and they are so busy because with COVID here hitting Zambia, nothing is shutting them down. They're meeting more frequently with smaller groups. They're busy day and night. They're traveling all over the country. Praise the Lord for the opportunity. Absolutely. I think about your 25,000. So the 1-on-3 model, how do you think that works? So maybe the door opens and you get an overflow that after the first week and people are showing up at these churches, and these overwhelmed pastors already call you up and they're like, Craig, what do we do now? I don't even have enough disciples in my church to train the next 10 people that walk in the door. How does 1-on-3 work in a community like yours?
I think 1-on-3 is absolutely the best model, Mike. And I'm not saying that because I'm talking to you. It's what I have used. 1-on-2 or 1-on-3. I think it enables you to have a manageable group that you can invest in and be able to see the fruit from. I've seen guys try to do it in larger groups, and you lose them. You lose the cohesiveness. It's much harder. And the pastors that I've talked to leading up to this is we've talked about that possibility. We're kind of going at it rather than having the crusade model where we try to get the whole community to come. I'm trying to get our churches, our Christians, our believers, our leaders to come together for a time of inspiration, to get out there and do it. And then as they win them, then they can bring them into the church rather than just doing a large altar call
Right.
where you don't know where people are going to end up. This, localizes it more. And that's why, I had a couple of guys ask me, where do you want us to pass out to go knock on doors? I said, in your community. I want you to do it around your church. I want you to do it in your sphere of influence. But I think, what our guys, the potential is there if the Spirit falls, that there could be an overwhelming. We don't know what the Lord's going to do through this and how the people are going to respond. But we have talked to them about developing a model and trying to, if they do, as they bring them in, this is where the churches that are doing the discipleship, actually doing discipleship, they're plugging people in immediately. They're taking them through the membership class, but then they're getting them into a small group.
Yeah.
Some churches are, each church does their own model. They figured it out for themselves.
Right.
But where it's going to be hard is for our smaller churches.
Yeah.
And that's where I hope they will allow me to come in and help guide them in a process that will work for them. And we're going to have some work to do, Mike. I mean, we don't know how the Lord's going to bless, but however he blesses, if he sends 1 or 10 or 100 new Christians, our responsibility is going to be to disciple them. And I've still got some pastors that still, it's about the numbers. And again, I think this is the larger churches get it. The smaller churches, it's harder to change that mindset. But I think most of them are getting it, and our younger pastors, and not our younger pastors, but our smaller church pastors are already spending more time with men in their church, even their deacons, to bring them up a notch. And that's what's encouraging to me, is watching that happen, so that when they do, if they had an influx of people, that they're equipping the people they already have to be able to take a group of people and take them through a process of discipleship. Yeah. So I'm optimistic. We'll have some work to do, definitely, because doing intentional discipleship is basically a new mindset. I mean, and we're still breaking down the walls of the old, and especially in older pastors, the younger pastors. This is where, to me, the younger pastors have an advantage over the older pastors, because the younger guys are coming out of seminary with this mindset now. They're coming out of school, whether it's Bible college or seminary or whatever it may be, even material, like you referenced that you can study at home is discipleship oriented. The older guys, it's just like trying to teach the old dog new tricks. Yeah. And they don't get it. And that's where, some pastoral exits will be for the better, because the younger guy can come in and lead them in a new model. And granted, that's something that we need, but that's one thing I see, that younger pastors, if churches will trust the younger guy and allow him to come in and not think they've got to have gray hairs, and 30 years of experience. Right. These younger guys are getting it, and they're being trained in it. And we're seeing a whole new set of pastors, at least in Southern Baptist seminaries that I know, that are coming out with the mind for discipleship. They're not just looking to add numbers to their church. They're looking to grow the body of Christ and make it stronger. Good.
Well, that kind of leads to the next question. And as I've asked it on each podcast, I'm getting slightly different answers, but I'd really like to hear how you're, because you're dealing with it more than most of the people I've talked to. So what are the obstacles that the small church pastor faces that prevents them from focusing on the Great Commission? And how can we overcome that? The number one answer from everyone is time. Right. And you got bivocational pastors at a majority of your churches. And frankly, as I speak to pastors, what I'm hearing is, Mike, I'm doing a sermon. I'm doing a small group. I have the building maintenance to take care of. I don't have a church accountant. I have to update the social media. My family already doesn't see me. And so you want me to take another burden on, and that's what it becomes, a burden, something to weigh them down even more. That's not what we're trying to accomplish. What are some of the other obstacles that you hear?
I think for us, it's aging congregations. Many of our smaller churches are older, senior adult majority, and they either can't physically, and or they have some of them have the mindset, we've been here for 50 years, we're not going to change now. I'll give you an example. When we started the emphasis of knocking on doors earlier this year, I did what I called zip code meetings. I brought pastors that served in the same zip code together in the hopes that they would cooperate with each other to saturate their community. We're in the same general vicinity. They're not necessarily next door to each other, but they cover the same zip code. And one of our younger pastors, who pastors a congregation that is older, said, first of all, their neighborhood has changed. And I think that's another hindrance, is that many of our churches don't look like their communities. At least here in my area, they may be an historic church and have been there for years, but the community around them has changed. It's either changed economically, racially, demographically. And so what we have is older people that have been in those churches for a long time, may not live around the church, but they drive into the church. And the only time they're there is on Sunday, and then they go home. But one of the young pastors said, my people will probably be fearful to go into our community. Some of them are on canes and walkers. They're not going to be able to walk down the sidewalks. And that's where we come in with a partner church to help them get out and look at them. But I think one of the greatest challenges is changing communities and aging congregations. I agree with the time factor, because it does take time. But I think that, at least, and I'm speaking for my locale, we have churches that are in what you would call the urban area. We have one major city in our county, and churches that are inside the city limits of that city are the ones that are struggling. The churches that are in the outlying areas, in our suburban areas, and we're not big suburbs, just outlying areas, they look like their community. They reflect their community. And they're doing a fairly decent job of reaching their community. But inside the city is where all the changes take place. And the problem is the community has changed, but the church hasn't. So we have predominantly white churches and predominantly African-American communities.
Got it.
We have affluent people who live in wealthier parts of the city that are coming into the poor parts of the city because they have, that's where their roots are. That's where mom and dad went to church. That's where grandparents went to church. And we're not going to let it die. And that is a great hindrance to the Great Commission, because when you're only there on Sunday morning and then you exit the community, you know it's changed, but you have no idea what it looks like anymore. You no longer identify with it. And I think that at least here, that's one of the major things. We have about 30 or 40 churches that are within that city limits, and all of them are struggling, with the exception of 2 churches. And one of them is First Baptist Church, and one of them's a newer church that was started about 7 years ago. But everybody else is struggling, and it's for that reason. I was talking to a lady. We had a conference almost 2 weeks ago. I was talking to a lady that came from used to be one of the largest churches in the city. They have a sanctuary that holds about 800. They're running 16 people now. Yeah. They're older people who've been there for generations. They don't live in the community anymore. Yeah. And so you talk about hindrance to the Great Commission. Yeah. I think the lack of churches that look like the community that they're in, the aging congregation is a major factor. But that would be my answer for here.
Wow,
And
that
it may
is,
be, I'm sure it's in other urban areas, it's probably the same.
yeah.
That
You
many
know,
churches, without church plants going in there that start out looking like the community, those churches are going to eventually die.
mhm,
They won't,
yeah.
they won't make it unless they have, unless they really embrace the desire to change.
Well, that is
It's
some,
most likely not going to happen.
well, that is some really great insight. Again, my background before ministry was retail management. And one of the things that we adopted in the early 2000s was that the leadership of each store should reflect the community where they serve. It just made sense. The leadership had to start looking and being from that community. It's changed. I mean, that company, you could drive an hour to work now. I'm a huge proponent of the local church, especially since we do a house church, right? So I
Right.
couldn't get more local.
Yes.
We moved to the community where
You
we're at
made it
now.
obvious.
Yeah, right. Couldn't get any closer.
He questioned your commitment.
When we moved here, we're in a more rural community now. So where I was born and raised in Chicago, I lived and worked in all the really rough neighborhoods on the south side. I lived on the north side in some tough neighborhoods. When I married my wife, we moved out to Wheaton. So you might be familiar with Wheaton. To me,
Yes,
when I
yes.
moved to Wheaton, I thought I'd move to the country. And that was
Right.
15 years ago. Now my neighbor has horses. So
Right.
I mean now, now I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, this is what, and I'm raising chickens. So I'm like, hey, this is the country. But we went knocking on doors. Literally, I went, okay, my wife would bake cookies. We would go knocking on doors and say, how you doing? We're your new neighbors. Let me tell you, who we are and what we believe, and see if we can build a fellowship based on Christ. And so that's kind of what my passion is for the house church, is being, you pointed out one of the things that I've experienced, which is I feel like on Sunday mornings, doesn't matter where you're at, Alabama, Illinois, California, Texas, on Sunday morning, you pull the light out of every community and you send them into a building. And maybe it's, in your case, it's a great example. They travel from their own neighborhood into a neighborhood they don't live in. And
Right.
for an hour or two or three at most, they're fellowshipping, they're praising the Lord, they're studying the word. But then after that, they go back to their own community. Where my view is that we should be light in our own communities. That's where God's called us, right? He's planted you. He planted you in Alabama. He planted me in Illinois. And we thank the Lord for this technology that we can encourage.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, we had I'll give you another example locally. One of our churches had dwindled down to about 7 attenders. And they called and said, we're going to have to close. They were struggling to pay the bills and this sort of thing. And I asked them, I said, well, where do you live? Because I didn't know. And all 7 of them lived in an outlying area.
Mm-hmm.
And they were driving to a community because the grandfather started the church, or and I told them, I said, the best thing you can do is go join a church in your community and go make a difference there.
Mm-hmm.
I said, you aren't doing the kingdom any good by keeping this church open. And I said, I don't mean to be harsh, but I said, you're never going to go any further than you are right now. Go find a local church and get involved in it. And they did. And so we sold the property and to another church that's in there, and they're not one of our churches, but they may be struggling in the same vein. Right. And again, that's what we have here. We have communities that have ample churches, but again, the church doesn't look like the community. And I'll say this: I'm living in Alabama. We have no African American churches. We do not have any Hispanic churches. They're here, but we haven't started any. And this is one of our goals: is to plant churches in the community that will look like the community. That's awesome. And some of the established churches will, probably get upset. Why are you putting another church over here? But I've had enough conversations with some of the struggling pastors. They will know why we're putting a church in there. We've looked at their options. We've looked at what they can do.
to me, this is a great opportunity, right? Like now we have new people who don't know about you, who don't know about your experience or what you believe or what you're teaching. And so that presents, as you guys do your door knocking, this wonderful opportunity to advance the gospel. So now maybe you can give me a little bit of advice. My heart is for America. When Hope Builders invited me to join the ministry, I serve to advance our work in Africa and Asia. But when I talked to Johan, I said, listen, the Lord has called me to the mission field here in the United States. And he said, well, go for it. And so how does Hope Builders Ministries come alongside a church like the ones that you just described? You identified many 30, 40 in your city, these smaller churches that are struggling. The pastors are already overwhelmed. How can I come alongside of a pastor like that and be an effective partner to advance the gospel? To we offer like right now I'm offering. I'll train you. Identify a leader in your church that will become your disciple making ministry leader, and I will train them through the program. I will be their contact person and walk with them. We come out and do pastors conferences. We come out and do disciple making conferences. How else can we be a blessing to the local church?
I think, Mike, is first of all, just knowledge of them knowing that this type of ministry is available. But I tell you, the great challenge is, Mike, I mean, everything that you offer is needed in Alabama, okay? You haven't said anything that we don't need here in the Deep South. It's getting churches to open up and receive that help. And, the biggest thing is their heart. And I think, again, with your experience, I mean, Chicago and Gadsden, Alabama are very different. But the needs and the different communities are probably very similar. Mm-hmm. And I love the house church model. Mm-hmm. I love the idea of being able to plant a church that way in your home. I think I'm all for that. And, that church expanding eventually, because hopefully you're going to outgrow that your home is not going to be big enough to house everybody. But you become a standalone church and watch that begin to grow. I think what you offer the pastors is, it's just a matter of getting them to take advantage of it. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff out there, and that they can access, but they don't. And that's where, that comes on me. That's not on you. That's on me, to help them to realize what they need. But I think, just if they would take advantage of it, that's the first thing. You offer everything that they need. It's a matter of getting them to enlist and say we need it. They need it. I know they need it, but they've got to know they need it. Right. And, so I think what you're doing is sufficient. I think, it's just a matter of allowing the partnership to take place. You're there, you're available. Yep. But you got to have people allow you to come in. It's kind of like me. I have to get the invitation to come in. I can't just walk in. We've got to communicate better that these resources are what are here that can truly help you. And I believe, that's what Hope Builders does. You're there. I just got to help my people become aware of your resources, to be able to allow something like this to come in, or me get training and bring it in, or however, whatever works best. Chicago and Gadsden are eons apart. Of course, with technology, we can do a lot now, and I've had to learn how to do that. But, everything that you've mentioned, everything that we've talked about, my heart, what our needs are here, and you offer things that will help our pastors, that will help our churches. Again, it's just a matter of me helping you get in the door to help them. So I don't know what else you can do. I don't know what else you can offer. I think you've got a well-rounded, you've got the ministry, you've got your hand on the pulse of what is needed. You've seen it in Africa, you've seen it in Asia, you've seen it work. I think one of the frustrating things is, at least in my experience, is the mission trips that I've been on. I've never been with a group on a mission trip that didn't say, while we're on the mission site, we could do this at home.
Mhm. Yeah.
We could do this at home. And the answer is yes, you can, but we never did.
Let me tell you something, Craig. I could talk to you for days. You are like my favorite person now. I'm going to probably bother you a lot. So we went to Zambia in 2019. It was my first trip with Hope Builders. I'd been to Malawi with another church many years ago. And this time I was really trying to get my feet wet, meet the leaders. We do indigenous missions. So it's always about training the locals.
Right.
And so we went to 7 different, what we call conferences throughout the country. Matthew, our Zambian leader, would drive us there, and we would do a 2-day conference. So the first day we would roll out an overview of Hope Builders. We'd have hundreds of pastors. It was just amazing. And so we would roll out the overview of the ministry. On day 2, we would do a morning presentation where we would do some of the components of what we're doing. About mid-morning, we would break up in groups, and we would go out into that local community to share the gospel. We would do this with, I would go out with, 6 or 7 of the local Zambians. So they would translate, or people would ask questions. And obviously it's Africa. The openness to the gospel is a lot easier than it is here. We would come back, and afterwards we would tell us what your experience was. And they would literally go out and they would say, okay, we went and knocked on 25 doors or huts, and 3 people professed Christ. And in every community, it was like 70 to 150 people would hear the gospel, believe the gospel. They would receive it, and we were celebrating it. My vision then was, when we came back, to do it here in the United States, to do a conference in a community just like that, like in your community, to come down and say, we're going to do a 2-day conference with you. Day 1, we're going to kind of walk through disciple making and all the things that we do. Day 2, we're going to go over a couple lessons, give you the gospel tools. We're going to go out and pick different areas. We're going to knock on doors, come back, and we're going to see what we learned from that. Maybe we did have some professions of faith. Maybe nobody was open. We have to adjust those things. But I'm with you. I feel like what we learn overseas, and that's what I do. I go there to learn.
Right.
Now comes back to the U.S. and now we need to this is the mission field. Put it into practice.
Absolutely. Well, when I read your material and I saw that part of your story, that when you returned in 2019, that God gave you a burden for America, I thought, this guy and I are going to get along fine, because, like I said, a Baptist association is here first primarily for our county, for our churches, to make them stronger. Part of making them stronger is sending them out on mission. Again, I'm all for that. We do not have one now, but eventually we will have a partner nationally and a partner internationally that we will minister to collectively. But the burden was, we're sending everybody, we're leaving Etowah County, and we're getting weaker and weaker and more lost. Our churches are struggling. And, God in his providence, we started this in 2019, just prior to the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process of preparing for this is my neighborhood emphasis and strategy, we revamped our staff. We went through a major staff overhaul, making our staff match better what would lead us into the future. We redid our budget, our overall budget. And I look back on that and I'm thinking, who knew that the pandemic was coming? Nobody. But that we were already in a position to step in, because we had changed our focus from way out there to right here.
One of the things that I think we definitely need to do in these podcasts is give men like yourselves an opportunity to present the gospel, so that anyone who hears this, I don't think that podcast is going to end up in the hands of too many non-believers. So what I'm trying to do is to equip the Christian to walk out the door with enough tools and confidence to share the gospel. So how would you do that?
My favorite approach to sharing the gospel is just sharing what Christ has done for me. I was 12 years old when the Lord convicted me in the middle of a church service and presented my heart and life to Christ, surrendered my life to him. What is no different than anybody else went through a straying time and away from the Lord. but never got too far away. The Lord has always had his hand on me, and Lord made it clear that, there was a definite change from lost to saved in my life, even though I was a 12-year-old, and I was a good kid. I mean, I didn't cause a lot of trouble. I might have been a little mischievous, but still at the same time, I knew that my life had been translated from dark to light. And I think, if I'm communicating with people today, whether you're lost or saved, that is one thing that Christ does for us. We live in a time of darkness. We live in a time of challenge. We live in a time of seeking. We live in a time where people are longing for the truth. And I think the greatest gift the church and you and I as Christians can give to those who may be lost is a genuine, authentic relationship with Jesus Christ. A life that has been completely and utterly transformed by the gospel and by the word of God. And I want to say to you, if you happen to tune into this and you are lost, I want you to know that Jesus Christ loves you. He died for you. He was buried for you, and he was raised for you. And he's the only one. You can look high and low, far and wide for answers. You can look in this corner and that corner, but you will always be disappointed until you come to Christ. Everything else will fall short of what Christ can do for you. He's the only one who can change your life and save you from your sins and forgive you of your sins. If you are a believer and you question things during this period of time, let me share with you that Jesus Christ has not changed. One of my favorite verses is Hebrews 13:8. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. While things around us may change, leaders may change, other things may change, Jesus Christ is the constant. And so he hasn't changed. Maybe you have. But I would encourage you to return to Christ. I would encourage you to return to his word. I would encourage you to return to a local body where you can be fed and nurtured and grown in the good news of Jesus Christ. And I would encourage you to do it now. Don't keep wandering. Don't keep looking. Return to what you know that will carry you forward. And that is Jesus Christ with the help of the local church. And I pray that God would lead you in that way, that God would lead you to salvation if you're lost, and God would lead you to renewal and recommitment to him if you're saved and you've wandered away.
Well, I want to thank you again for your time today and that beautiful testimony, and we will continue to pray for your ministry and the work you're doing in Alabama. God bless you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you for tuning in. Learn more and download the Disciple Makers app at www.hbmin.org. That's www.hbmin.org. You can also get information about our Certificate of Ministry program, Ambassadors of Hope, our forthcoming House Church Network, Fellowship of Hope for the U.S., and find out how your church can host a Disciple Makers Conference. We hope you will continue to join us in our journey of making disciples for Christ everywhere, all the time to the end of time. Go out and be a hope builder today.